This is the Viltrox 13mm f1.4. It's an APS-C capable lens that honestly would be perfect if it didn't have one fatal flaw. Let me explain. What's up, nerds? Welcome back to the channel. Today I am checking out the sort of new Viltrox 13mm f1.4. For logistic purposes, this is the E-mount lens. This does come in Fuji mount and I believe in Nikon mount. Now, when I was purchasing the Sony FX30, I was looking for a lens to complement that Super 35 or APS-C sensor. And I gotta give a lot of credit to the YouTube channel GX Ace because his review of this lens was fantastic. And honestly, it was a really big reason that I purchased this lens myself, although he was shooting it on Fuji. So consider this video just a Sony perspective of using this lens. All of the example footage of using the Viltrox 13mm will be with my Sony FX30. Right as I purchased my Sony FX30, I had actually already had this in the mail. So I got to test the FX30 immediately with this lens out on the streets. And using that lens in the city was a really cool opportunity for me because, fun fact, I actually started as an architectural photographer. That's kind of how I got into using cameras and taking photos and videos and stuff like that. I've always been fascinated by wide angle lenses, how they make you feel like the image or subject that you're taking a picture of, like a building, is much larger than it actually is in perspective. Kind of like this worm's eye view look of reality. So this lens goes from f1.4 to f16, which is a very respectable aperture range, especially given that this goes down to 1.4. A lot of wide angle lenses I've seen, like a 14mm prime, other than the Sony G Master that came out, are typically like 2.0 or 2.8. So they're gonna be a little bit higher in that aperture range. The 1.4 lets you experiment quite a bit with this lens. In fact, my last few videos, the A-roll is actually shot with the FX30 and the Viltrox 13mm. Today, I'm on my Sony a7 IV with the 24-70 on. But I have used this lens in a lot of situations where I've stopped down all the way to 1.4 at a nighttime situation and used this for a portrait style video. And you can get pretty close with this lens. The minimum focus is 0.73 feet. So now, like I mentioned before at the beginning of this video, this is a APS-C capable lens, meaning you can't use it on full frame cameras unless you're on a camera like the Sony a7 IV, which has a APS-C mode. So you can punch in and you'll be able to use this lens. I do notice that there is a little bit of vignetting when using this with the a7 IV on the Super 35 mode. Real quick, I want to talk about the build quality of this lens. It is entirely made of metal. There isn't any plastic parts that I know of. Maybe in the actual like aperture ring right here, like this piece. No, that's metal. Yeah, that's metal. There is no weather sealing on it, so keep that in mind. As far as I can tell, the glass seems extremely high quality. This video isn't going to have a ton of scientific tests to make sure that this lens is like perfect or whatever. Mostly just giving my opinion from a real world perspective using this lens. I did have a chance to use this lens going to Puerto Rico, so some of the B-roll shots are going to be from that trip. I was also in New York City, and then other stuff is just shot around my hometown here. At 1.4, you can definitely tell the image becomes slightly soft. I tend to stop down to either f2 or 2.2, 2.8, just to sharpen that up a little bit, but I would be confident using this at f1.4 for like, I don't know, like weddings or portraits, something that's gonna be a little bit more dreamy, where sharpness isn't the main feature. But when I use it for my YouTube videos, I'm usually at 2.8. And when I'm shooting landscapes or architectural type of stuff, I'm usually at f8 or f11 to get the best amount of sharpness. F11 isn't my favorite. I usually like being at f8. I think that's like the sweet spot because it's halfway in between the aperture range. For a third-party lens, the autofocus is tack sharp using the Sony autofocus system. That's including photo and video. The continuous autofocus is fantastic. It always catches my eye. I'd say it's up on par with some G Master lenses. I wouldn't say it's like perfectly on par, but it's almost there. I think Viltrox has done a fantastic job keeping up with Sony's fast autofocus system. I feel like that's one downfall of some Fujifilm cameras and lenses, is that the lenses haven't really updated with Fujifilm's autofocus system. So the lenses can kind of drag down the camera's autofocus. Where with Sony, that can happen with some third-party lenses, but I haven't noticed it with the Viltrox. It also does have a USB-C port on the back, so there are updates available for this lens that you can. I have not done that, so I won't attest to to that or be a testimonial with that, but I should try it. As far as manual focus, this is probably my favorite feature of this lens. One thing I have a hard time with photo lenses is that the focus ring is very loose, and I find that frustrating. But with this lens, it is smooth. Let me see if I can hold. It is so smooth. It has the perfect amount of resistance that has the feeling of a cine lens. Cine lenses tend to give a little more resistance than a photo lens because photo lenses are relying upon autofocus, obviously. And this lens has just the right amount of resistance. I mean, Viltrox has nailed it, and almost all of their Viltrox lenses have this feature, and oh my gosh, it's so good. I love it. As far as distortion and warping goes, if you look really close to the glass on this lens, it is rounded, and that's because it's a wide angle lens, don't get me wrong. But given that it's rounded, you are gonna have some distortion and warping. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't noticed much. With my architectural and landscape stuff, you can see some on the edges, but that's pretty easy to compensate with photos within Lightroom. And within video, there are some things you can do, but I haven't tested those because I haven't really felt like I needed to, honestly. But I think given the price, the minimal amount of distortion is very impressive. Speaking of which, the price is just over $400 US, which in my opinion is a pretty reasonable price, especially for what you're getting in this lens, a 1.4 wide angle lens. Even though it's APS-C, I still think that that's a banger deal when it comes to the capabilities of this beauty. Now, there is one flaw with this lens that I'm not gonna lie has bugged me, and that's the flaring. I'm usually a pretty big fan of flaring on a lens, but when it's distracting, that's where I have a hard time. If you pixel peep in a couple of my last YouTube videos, you might notice that there is a blue dot that's like typically right on this part of the screen. And it comes from my Aperture MC lights that are above my amazing posters back here. So typically what I have to do to fix that is either throw a lens hood on it or use a matte box, which again is an easy fix. But another issue that I came across is when I was pointing this directly into the sun, usually trying to get some sort of a silhouetted shot of a subject, or I remember specifically it was around golden hour and we were headed out to the beach and I was pointing this into the sun and I couldn't get a single shot in focus because the flaring was distracting my autofocus. And so that was probably the biggest issue that I noticed with this lens. And to be fair, I've only run into that problem a couple times and I've been able to solve each of them. But I would have preferred to get the original shot that I had. But that has been a decent concern from this lens. It does come with a lens hood, which is very well built, honestly. It's made of metal, and that hood blocks plenty of flares to the point that you probably have minimal issues. But because this lens is so wide, you really have to adjust your shot to get rid of that flaring. So ultimately, I think you're getting an ultimate bang for your buck with this lens. There is the flaw of that flaring, but I think there are plenty of ways to get around it. Just over $400, you're getting good build quality, an f1.4 lens. It is APS-C, but think about it. If you wanted a lens like this for full frame, you're gonna be spending well over $1,000, if not $2,000. So for APS-C capable under $500, I think you're getting plenty with this lens. If you want to purchase this lens, there are links down in the description. There are affiliate links, so I will make money when you purchase this lens. So if you do happen to purchase it, thank you for supporting the channel. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell button so you never miss out on new young filmmaker content. Good luck filmmaking.